Max had never been the type to get involved in anything unusual. He was an ordinary guy, living an ordinary life in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a decaying city. His routine was simple: wake up, go to work, come home, and watch a little TV before heading to bed. He didn't believe in aliens, conspiracy theories, or anything strange. Life was mundane, but he was content with it. One rainy evening, everything changed. Max had just returned from a long day at the office, and as he fumbled with his keys to unlock the front door, something caught his eye. A small, glowing light shimmered at the edge of his porch. It wasn't a flashlight or anything he recognized, just a soft, pulsing glow. He squinted, confused, but before he could make sense of it, something shifted in the shadows. Max stepped forward cautiously, his curiosity getting the best of him. He bent down, trying to see if there was something or someone there. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw what it was: a tiny creature curled up against his doorstep. It was small, no bigger than a cat, but there was something incredibly strange about it. Its skin was smooth and pale, almost glowing, and its eyes, those eyes, were the brightest shade of violet he had ever seen. They shimmered in the dim light like precious jewels. The creature was covered in what looked like platinum blonde hair, which looked almost unnatural in its perfection. It had a delicate frame and long limbs, and though it was alien in appearance, it somehow appeared peaceful, almost helpless. Max's heart raced. What was it? A trick of the light? His first thought was to step back and call animal control, or maybe even the police. But then, as if sensing his hesitation, the creature's eyes locked onto his, and Max froze. He felt a strange pull, something deep inside urging him to help. "Hey," Max whispered, cautiously reaching out. "Are you okay?" The creature blinked slowly, its gaze never leaving him. Then, as if understanding his words, it let out a soft, almost musical sound. It didn't speak, but Max felt a strange sense of reassurance from it. It wasn't hostile. It was lost. Max bent down even further and, after a brief moment of hesitation, gently lifted the tiny alien into his arms. It was surprisingly warm to the touch, its body soft and light. Max shivered from the cold, but the creature didn't seem to mind the rain. Its violet eyes looked up at him with an expression of trust, and in that instant, Max made a decision. "I guess I can't just leave you out here," Max muttered to himself, still in shock. He carefully cradled the creature and carried it inside his house. Inside, Max tried to make the creature comfortable. He set it on the couch and draped a blanket over it. As he moved around the room, grabbing a towel to dry his own hair, he couldn't help but stare at the alien. Its eyes were still wide open, following his every move. He didn't know what to do. Should he call someone? A scientist, a government agency, but something told him this was not the right move. It didn't feel like the creature was dangerous, nor did it seem like it was here to cause any harm. It looked scared, vulnerable. Max sat down on the edge of the couch, trying to think of what to do next. The alien, who Max now thought of as Lyra for lack of a better name, still hadn't moved. It lay there, calm, watching him. Max ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered under his breath. But before he could answer himself, he heard a faint voice, barely a whisper. "Help me," Lyra said, her voice soft, yet clear in his mind. Max froze, his heart skipping a beat. Had she just spoken? No, that couldn't be right. He must be hearing things. But then the creature's eyes glowed brighter for a moment, and once again that voice echoed in his mind. This time it was stronger, more insistent. "Please," she whispered again, her lips not moving. Max stared at her, bewildered. He didn't understand what was happening. How could she communicate like this? But even though the situation was strange, he couldn't help but feel a sense of compassion for the tiny alien. "You're speaking in my head," Max said quietly, not sure if he was dreaming. Lyra's violet eyes blinked once, and Max swore he saw a flicker of sadness in them. She nodded, but still remained silent otherwise. Max took a deep breath and stood up, pacing the room. He tried to make sense of everything. How was this even possible? A tiny alien communicating through thought? It didn't make sense, and yet he couldn't deny the reality of it. Max looked back at Lyra, who was now sitting up, her body straightening as if she were trying to get a better view of him. She reached out a hand, her fingers delicate, almost graceful. Max hesitated for a moment before walking over to her. He crouched down, cautiously offering his hand in return. The tiny alien placed her hand in his, and for a brief moment there was a surge of warmth between them. It was unlike anything Max had ever felt before, an overwhelming sense of connection. It was as though she was trying to tell him something without words, without any physical communication. She was asking for help. "I'll help you," Max said quietly, though he wasn't sure what kind of help she needed. "But I don't know what you want me to do." Lyra's eyes seemed to glow even brighter, and for a moment, Max felt like she was reading his thoughts. He blinked, unsure of how to react, but something in her gaze softened. She seemed relieved. Max sat back down beside her, not sure where this would lead. He had no plan, no answers. But as the night wore on, the creature's presence grew more comforting than unsettling. The strange bond between them was undeniable. As the hours passed, Max sat with Lyra, unsure of how to make sense of the situation. She didn't demand much, just the occasional glance or a gentle movement, but Max couldn't help but wonder what her presence meant. Why had she come to him? And more importantly, what was she going to do next? For the moment, he couldn't find any answers. All he knew was that this tiny alien was no longer just a visitor on his doorstep. She was in his life now. And as much as he tried to resist, Max had the feeling that she wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. The next few days were a blur for Max. Every time he thought things might return to normal, Lyra would do something to make it clear that she wasn't going anywhere. The tiny alien had already taken up residence in his living room, curled up on the couch as if it was her rightful place. She seemed to make herself comfortable, and Max, though confused and exhausted, couldn't bring himself to kick her out. She wasn't exactly asking for much. Food, water, and a safe place to stay were the basics she needed, and Max, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, kept providing them. But it wasn't just the physical care she demanded. There was something more, something intangible that Max couldn't figure out. Her eyes, those deep violet eyes, seemed to constantly be watching him, studying him as if she knew something he didn't. The longer she stayed, the more unsettled he became. The strange part was that Lyra didn't speak out loud, not once. Yet every time she needed something, Max felt her thoughts as if they were his own. It was subtle at first, a slight nudge in his mind, like a whisper on the edge of his consciousness. She didn't need to say words to communicate. Her emotions and desires were transferred directly to him, and they came through loud and clear. At first, Max tried to ignore it. He convinced himself that it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but the more time he spent with her, the stronger the connection became. It wasn't just that he felt what she felt, it was as though he could hear her thoughts. And that he couldn't explain at all. One evening, as Max prepared dinner, he felt her presence near him in the kitchen. He glanced over his shoulder to see her standing silently by the counter. She wasn't asking for anything this time. Instead, she just watched him, her glowing eyes focused on his every movement. Max sighed and set down the knife he was using to chop vegetables. He had been feeling the weight of her silent gaze more and more these past few days. It was like she was constantly studying him, trying to figure out what made him tick. He couldn't help but wonder what it was about him that made her choose him, of all the people on Earth. "What is it you want from me?" he asked, the frustration finally spilling over. "I'm just a guy trying to live my life. I don't know what you're doing here or why you're here, but I can't keep doing this without knowing something." Lyra didn't respond. She simply tilted her head slightly to one side, as if considering his words. Then she reached up with one small hand and touched his arm gently. The moment her fingers made contact, a wave of warmth rushed through him, followed by an overwhelming sense of calm. It was so strong that Max almost staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. He was surprised at how her touch affected him, how her presence seemed to calm every chaotic thought in his mind. He could feel it now. This wasn't just some random alien who had crash-landed in his life. No, Lyra was trying to tell him something, and he had been too stubborn to listen. Max took a deep breath and met her gaze. "All right, I'm listening. What do you need from me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, Lyra's eyes flashed a brilliant violet, and a soft hum filled the room. It wasn't a sound he could hear with his ears, but something inside him recognized it. The hum grew louder, filling the space, vibrating through him. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Lyra's hand was still resting lightly on his arm. She seemed content with the connection, though it left Max more confused than ever. He felt as though she had said something to him, but the words didn't come in a way he could understand. The feeling lingered, something was being asked of him, but he couldn't quite make sense of it. Days passed, and Max grew more accustomed to Lyra's silent presence. She didn't need to speak, he already knew what she wanted. Her demands were becoming clearer, more direct, and yet still strangely subtle. She would always glance toward his computer when she needed him to look something up, or shift her attention toward the window when she wanted him to open it. But it wasn't just the little things. There were moments when she would stand by the door, waiting, as if she wanted to go somewhere. Every time, Max would follow her gaze and get the sense that she was trying to tell him something important. Max wasn't sure why he was doing it. Why was he letting this alien stay in his life? Why was he continuing to indulge her strange requests? Maybe it was because of the connection they shared. Maybe it was the way she made him feel, calm, focused, even when he had every reason to panic. He couldn't explain it, but he knew one thing for sure. Lyra wasn't going anywhere, and neither was he. And then, one night, the true nature of her demands finally became clear. Max was sitting at his desk, scrolling through emails, when he felt the familiar presence of Lyra behind him. She didn't speak, but he could feel her waiting for him to acknowledge her. He turned around and saw her standing by the door, looking out at the rainy night beyond the window. She raised one hand, gesturing toward the door, then pointed up to the sky. Max followed her gaze to the heavens, but all he could see was a dark, overcast sky with the occasional flash of lightning. His heart began to race as he realized what she was asking for. "You want to go outside?" he asked, his voice tense. Lyra's head tilted again, her violet eyes meeting his. She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. The connection between them was stronger than ever. Max could feel it now. She needed to go somewhere. He didn't know where, but he could sense it in the pit of his stomach. His mind raced with questions. What was she really after? Why hadn't she told him everything? What was out there in the rain, in the dark, that she needed? He stood up, his mind wrestling with uncertainty. Still, he couldn't refuse her. He had already crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. "All right," Max said, his voice almost a whisper. "Let's go." Max grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Lyra followed, her small feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. As they stepped outside into the cold night, Max felt the weight of the situation settle over him. The rain had picked up, cold droplets soaking through his clothes almost instantly. But Lyra seemed unaffected by the weather. She walked with purpose, her movements fluid and graceful, as though she was being pulled in a direction Max couldn't understand. They walked in silence for what felt like hours. The only sound was the steady patter of rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Max glanced around, trying to make sense of the journey. What was this about? Why had Lyra led him out here? And then they reached it. A small, abandoned building on the outskirts of town, something Max had never noticed before. It was old, decaying, and clearly out of place in the quiet, suburban neighborhood. Max stopped at the entrance, his breath visible in the cold air. Lyra stood still, looking up at the building, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Max hesitated but felt an irresistible pull toward the door. He pushed it open, and the two of them entered the building together. Inside, it was pitch black, the only light coming from Lyra's eyes. Max felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as he stepped further into the building. There was something here, something important. But what? Lyra moved ahead of him, her footsteps soft and sure. She led him down a long, narrow hallway until they reached a room at the far end. Max's pulse quickened as they entered the room. It was filled with strange symbols, and in the center of the room, an object sat on a pedestal, glowing softly, just like Lyra's eyes. Max stepped forward, instinctively reaching out to touch the object. But just as his fingers grazed its surface, a voice echoed in his mind. "It's time." Max froze, the voice sounding both alien and familiar at the same time. He turned to look at Lyra, and in her eyes he saw the answer he had been searching for. This wasn't just about taking care of her. This was something much bigger. He had been chosen for a reason, but what that reason was, Max still didn't know. He could feel the pull of the object, its energy drawing him in. And deep down, he knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Max stood frozen, his hand still resting on the glowing object in the center of the room. The voice that had spoken to him in his mind lingered in the air, its words both cryptic and urgent. "It's time." He turned to look at Lyra, her eyes glowing brighter now, almost as if they were reflecting the energy of the object. She didn't move, but her presence was a constant pull on Max, drawing him toward the pedestal like a magnet. He didn't know why, but he felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, as though everything in his life had led him to this moment. The room around him seemed to hum with energy. The air felt heavier, charged, as if the very walls were alive with some kind of ancient force. Max took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. What was this object, and why was it calling to him so strongly? Lyra's voice once again filled his mind. "You must take it," she urged softly, her words filled with an emotion Max couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, but something close to it. She was pleading with him, but why? He glanced at her, seeing the mix of desperation and trust in her eyes. It was clear that Lyra wasn't just some innocent alien. There was something more to her, something tied to this object. He could feel it now, deep in his gut. Whatever this was, it was important. Max swallowed, trying to push back the flood of thoughts rushing through his mind. He didn't know what would happen if he touched the object again, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't walk away from it. Not now. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the smooth, cool surface. The moment his skin made contact with the object, a jolt of electricity shot through his body. He gasped, stumbling back, but the energy didn't let go. It was like his body was being pulled into the object itself, as if it were absorbing him. The glow of the object intensified, and Max felt his mind racing, overwhelmed by the flood of images and thoughts that came rushing in. He saw flashes of a vast, starry sky, swirling nebulae and strange planets he couldn't recognize. He saw Lyra, but not as the tiny alien who had arrived on his doorstep. Instead, she appeared much larger, standing on a distant world, surrounded by other beings like her, tall, elegant, and powerful. Their civilization was advanced, their technology far beyond anything Max could comprehend. But there was something dark in their past. Something that had brought them to the brink of destruction. The images kept coming, faster and faster. Max could barely process what he was seeing, but he could feel the weight of it all. Lyra's race had once been a dominant force in the galaxy, but something had gone wrong. Their world had fallen into chaos, and they had scattered, hoping to find the remnants of their civilization in the farthest corners of the universe. And then Max saw it. A huge, dark shape, something that seemed to move between the stars, swallowing everything in its path. The void, the thing that had destroyed Lyra's world and perhaps countless others. Max could feel its hunger, its insatiable desire to consume everything it touched. It was coming. It was still coming. "Help me," Lyra's voice whispered, louder now, as if the words were coming from inside his very mind. "I need you to stop it." Max felt his heart race as the images faded, leaving him breathless and disoriented. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. What had just happened? The room around him was still the same, but it felt different now, heavier, more real. And the object on the pedestal had stopped glowing, its energy now quiet and still. Lyra was standing beside him now, her eyes locked onto his, her small form radiating an intense energy. She didn't say anything, but Max could feel her presence stronger than ever. He could feel her thoughts, her emotions, pressing into his mind. She was scared. She was afraid of what was coming, and she needed him. She had brought him here for a reason, and that reason was clear now. The darkness that had destroyed her world was coming for Earth, and Max was the only one who could stop it. He took a step back, his mind reeling with everything he had just seen. He couldn't process it all. But one thing stood out. Lyra wasn't just an alien in need of help. She was the last hope of her people, and he was the one she had chosen to help her. "You want me to fight it?" Max asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes were filled with determination, but Max could still see the fear hidden beneath it. She didn't know if they could win, she didn't know if it was even possible, but she had no choice, and neither did he. Max ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his racing thoughts. How am I supposed to stop something like that? I'm just me." Lyra's gaze softened, and she reached out to touch his arm again, sending a gentle wave of warmth through him. She didn't need to explain, he could feel it. He was part of something bigger now. The connection between them had grown stronger, and with it, the sense of purpose. He had been chosen, not by chance, but by fate. The object he had touched was part of a much larger plan, a plan that involved him. "You're not just you anymore," Lyra's voice whispered in his mind, though her lips never moved. "You're connected to us now, to everything. You can do this." Max didn't know how to respond. How could he? But he could feel the weight of her words, heavy and real. He wasn't just helping an alien. He was standing at the edge of something far bigger than himself, and if he didn't act, his world would be lost. He took a deep breath and turned to face Lyra. "All right, what do I need to do?" Her eyes shone with relief, and for the first time, Max saw something resembling a smile cross her face. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. She had always been calm, collected, but now he saw the glimmer of hope that had been missing in her. She hadn't believed they could win, but now with Max by her side, there was a chance. Lyra motioned toward the pedestal where the object still sat. "The relic," she said softly. "It's the key. We need to find the rest of it." Max nodded, though he had no idea what she meant. The relic, what was it and where was the rest of it? But there was no time to ask questions. He knew he had to act. Lyra had brought him this far, and now it was his turn to take the next step. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was still racing. "Tell me what to do." Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his chest, her touch sending a surge of warmth through him again. This time it was different. He could feel her power, her energy, flowing into him. He could feel the connection between them growing stronger, the bond that tied their fates together. "The first part of the relic is hidden on Earth," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "We have to find it before it's too late, but we can't do it alone." Max nodded. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. Max couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as he stared at the glowing object in front of him. The relic. It was a key, Lyra had said, but a key to what? Max wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't back down now. There was no turning back. Everything he had done, every step he had taken, had led him to this moment. Lyra's eyes were filled with determination, and Max couldn't let her down. He glanced at her, his heart pounding. The tiny alien seemed more powerful than he could have ever imagined. The connection between them had deepened over the past few days, and Max had started to understand more about Lyra's people. She wasn't just a lost wanderer. She was a warrior, a protector, and she had come to Earth for a reason. And now it seemed like that reason was about to unfold in a way that would change everything. "We need to find the rest of it," Lyra said, her voice calm but urgent. She wasn't asking for Max's help anymore. She was telling him. This was no longer just a favor. This was their fight. "The relic is scattered. We have to gather the pieces before the others do." Max nodded. He still didn't fully understand what was at stake, but he could feel the weight of it. The universe, the fate of Earth, it all rested on their shoulders now. The building around them seemed to hum with energy. Max could still feel the power of the relic pulsing in his fingertips. He couldn't let go of it, no matter how hard he tried. It was as if the object had fused with him, its energy flowing through him. He could feel it deep inside his chest, a constant reminder of the mission ahead. Lyra moved toward the door, her steps light but purposeful. Max followed her, his thoughts racing. They had to find the rest of the relic, but where would they begin, and who else was after it? As they stepped outside into the rain-soaked streets, the world felt different. The air was thick with tension, as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. Max couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He looked around, but there was no one in sight. Just the endless stretch of empty streets, darkened by the storm. Max turned to Lyra, who was staring straight ahead, her eyes focused on something in the distance. She didn't speak, but Max could feel the pull of her presence. She was leading him somewhere. He didn't know where, but he trusted her. They walked through the city in silence, the rain pattering softly against their skin. Max couldn't help but notice how different things seemed now. The world felt distant, as if they were walking through a dream. It was as if everything around them was part of some larger plan, and Max was just a small piece of it. As they reached the edge of the city, Max spotted something strange. A figure, standing in the shadows of a dark alleyway. At first, Max thought it was just a trick of the light, but then the figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a tall, cloaked figure with piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Max instinctively took a step back, his heart racing. The figure didn't speak, but its presence was enough to send a chill down his spine. It wasn't human. Lyra stood her ground, her eyes never leaving the figure. Max could feel the tension between them, the power building in the air. He knew this was no coincidence. This figure was here for a reason, and it wasn't friendly. "You've come for the relic, haven't you?" the figure said, its voice low and menacing. The words sent a shiver down Max's spine, and he could feel Lyra's energy brimming, ready to act. Max glanced at Lyra, who didn't seem the least bit surprised. Her calm demeanor never wavered. "You knew this would happen," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "You knew we'd be followed." Lyra's eyes flickered for a moment, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer, but Max could feel the weight of her thoughts. She had known. She had known they wouldn't have time to gather the relic's pieces in peace. The universe, it seemed, had other plans. The figure in the shadows took another step forward, its eyes narrowing. "You cannot stop what is coming," it said, its voice filled with an eerie certainty. "The relic belongs to us. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Max stood his ground, his mind racing. He didn't know what the figure meant, but he knew one thing: they couldn't let it take the relic. Not now, not ever. "Get away from her," Max said, his voice firm. He didn't know where the courage came from, but something inside him clicked. Lyra needed him. And he wasn't going to let anyone take her or the relic. The figure laughed, the sound hollow and cold. "You think you can stop us? You are nothing. You are a human, weak, insignificant." Max's blood boiled. He wasn't just a human, not anymore. He had a purpose now. He had a role to play in this grand story, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. Without warning, the figure lunged forward, its hands reaching out to grab Lyra. But before it could make contact, Lyra moved. It was almost too fast for Max to follow. She raised her hand, and the air around them shimmered with energy. The figure was thrown back, crashing into the wall of the alleyway with a sickening thud. Max blinked, stunned. He hadn't seen anything like that before. Lyra's power was undeniable. She wasn't just some helpless alien. She was a force to be reckoned with. The figure groaned, pushing itself up from the ground. "You think this is over?" it snarled. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, her gaze fixed on the figure. "Leave now." "Before you regret it," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. The figure hesitated, its eyes flickering with uncertainty. Then, without another word, it disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Max exhaled, his breath shaky. He turned to Lyra, his heart still racing. "What was that?" Lyra looked at him, her expression serious. "The others, they want the relic. They'll stop at nothing to get it." Max's mind was spinning. The relic wasn't just some artifact. It was a key to something far greater, and the people, or whatever they were, who were after it wouldn't stop until they had it. Lyra had known this all along, and now Max understood why she had come to him. "What do we do now?" Max asked, his voice filled with determination. He wasn't backing down, not now, not when he knew what was at stake. Lyra's eyes softened for a moment, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We gather the rest of the relic," she said, "and we stop them." Max nodded. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: he wasn't alone in this. Lyra was by his side, and together they would fight to protect the relic, no matter the cost.